Have you ever witnessed something so ridiculous, so over-the-top petty, that your brain just couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream? That was me, standing there at sunrise, tightening the last screw on a freshly built 6-foot wooden privacy fence, one that now carved our once shared lakeshore clean in two, grass, sand, dock and water sliced like a piece of cake at a legal war party. Behind me, a growing crowd of neighbours stood with coffee cups in hand, half of them filming, jaws hanging open. Across the new fence, on the other side, stood Margaret, cousin to our neighbourhood's most notorious HOA president, Karen Whitmore. Margaret's expensive patio loungers and half-finished jet ski ramp now sat marooned, cut off behind a wall of treated lumber. Her jaw hung slack. I swear I saw her spill her mimosa. But before I tell you how we got to this level of neighbourhood drama, let's rewind. It all started about 5 years ago when I bought my dream home in a lakeside community called Cedarbrook Hills. The biggest selling point? Deeded lakefront access. My lot came with partial ownership of a beautiful stretch of shoreline, plus rights to use the shared dock and beach. My kids grew up fishing off that dock. My wife and I spent countless evenings watching sunsets there. That lake wasn't just scenery, it was part of our family's life. For a while, things were perfect. The HOA kept the common spaces tidy, but mostly stayed out of everyone's personal business. And then Karen happened. About 6 months ago, Karen became HOA president. Overnight, she morphed from the neighbourhood busybody to full-blown neighbourhood tyrant. She started handing out fines like Halloween candy. One neighbour got cited for having unauthorised garden gnomes. Another was told her bird feeder was a wildlife hazard. Someone else got a violation notice for having curtains that weren't neutral tones. But the worst part wasn't her new rules, it was the favoritism. Karen started appointing friends and family to all the paid HOA roles. Her brother-in-law suddenly became the official lawn inspector, getting paid to stroll around with a clipboard. Her childhood best friend landed the pool maintenance contract. And when her cousin Margaret came to town, oh boy, that's when it all went nuclear. Margaret was supposed to be here for a few weeks, but weeks turned to months. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find Margaret had transformed the shared lakefront into her own private resort. I'm talking tiki torches, a full lounge set, a portable bar, and speakers blasting top 40 hits from 7 a.m. till dusk. Worse, she started building a wooden ramp for her jet ski right on shared property. I tried to be civil, walked over, introduced myself, and politely mentioned that the shoreline was deeded shared property for multiple homeowners, not just hers. Margaret didn't even flinch. She flipped her sunglasses down, sipped her drink, and said, "Karen said it's mine now. If you have a problem, take it up with her." And, as if on cue, Margaret pulled out a crumpled letter, an official-looking document titled Temporary Lakefront Usage Assignment, signed by none other than Karen Whitmore. It claimed the HOA board had unanimously approved giving Margaret exclusive use of the entire lakefront until further notice. Only problem, 2 board members were out of town when that vote supposedly happened. Something smelled fishy. So, I did what any rational person would do. I pulled property records. A quick trip to the county clerk's office confirmed what I already knew, that lakefront parcel was legally tied to specific properties including mine. The HOA had zero authority to strip that away without a formal legal process and my signed consent. Armed with the proof, I brought it to the next HOA meeting. Let me tell you, Karen's reaction was Oscar-worthy. Face flushed, voice shaking, she stood at the front of the room and insisted that the HOA had just recently amended its governance authority over all common lakefront decisions. She threatened $500 daily fines for anyone who will ignore her. She even held up a second mystery document, a so-called emergency bylaw adjustment, passed during a meeting no one could remember attending while all this played out. Margaret's lakefront takeover only grew worse. More furniture, bigger speakers, weekend parties with dozens of guests. When my 8-year-old daughter walked down with her towel one morning for her usual swim, Margaret physically blocked her path and told her she wasn't allowed near Margaret's shoreline. That was it. the final straw. I spent the next week knee-deep in paperwork. As a contract attorney, this was my wheelhouse. I pulled up my property survey, dug out decades of HOA meeting minutes, and reviewed my purchase contract in detail. What I found was clear as day. The HOA could not infringe on deeded property lines. Any attempt to do so opened them up to legal liability. I drafted a formal cease and desist letter, sent copies by certified mail to both Karen and Margaret. They had exactly 72 hours to remove all unauthorized structures and furniture from the shared property line or face court action. Did they take it seriously? Of course not. Karen showed up at my door with Margaret in tow, and some guy in an ill-fitting suit who she introduced as their legal counsel. He spent most of the conversation flipping through a manila folder and mumbling legal terms completely out of context. Karen offered me a year of waived HOA dues if I'd just let it slide. Margaret suggested a shared lakefront calendar where she'd get Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Their lawyer suggested, wait for it, that Margaret had somehow earned squatters' rights over the beach. I laughed them off my porch. With their deadline expired, I launched phase 2. First, I hired a licensed surveyor to mark the exact boundary lines. Turns out, the property line split the lakefront almost perfectly down the middle. Margaret's setup wasn't just on the shared space, it sprawled way past it, well into my legally owned section. Next, I headed to the local hardware store, bought enough wood and fencing material to build something that couldn't be ignored. When the cashier asked where I planned to put it, I smiled and said right through a lounge chair set. By the next morning, word had spread. Neighbors started gathering with lawn chairs and coffee, watching as I and a small construction crew erected a tall, sturdy privacy fence, running straight across the sand, cutting through the dock and splitting the lakefront in half. Margaret's face when she walked outside, priceless. Her outdoor speakers were now facing a wall of wood. Her jet ski ramp now led nowhere. Her patio loungers divided like rival kingdoms. Karen showed up 10 minutes later, still in a bathrobe and curlers, shouting legal threats, emotional distress claims, even yelling something about a civil conspiracy. She called the police. The officers showed up, reviewed my permits and the property survey, and left. Next came city code enforcement, same result. Then Karen escalated, filing complaints with the mayor's office, county code enforcement, and even sending a handwritten letter to the state attorney general. All while Margaret's husband, who flew in mid-crisis, took one look at the mess, turned pale, and muttered something about how Karen had dragged them into a legal nightmare. At the emergency HOA meeting later that week, Karen tried one final Hail Mary, issuing an executive order to have my fence torn down. But this time, the board's own lawyer stood up. He made it very clear that Karen had been acting outside her authority, exposing the HOA to lawsuits, and suggested immediate action. The vote to remove her as HOA president unanimous. But that wasn't the end. Turns out Karen had been diverting HOA funds, paying her brother-in-law double for landscaping, fudging pool maintenance invoices, and even reimbursing herself for legal fees related to Margaret's fake easement. 3 months later, Karen stood in county court convicted of HOA fund misappropriation and breach of fiduciary duty. Her sentence, 2 years probation, over 300 hours of community service, and in order to repay nearly $50,000 to the HOA. And as for me, I still sit on my half of the dock with a morning coffee, staring at that beautifully straight fence, enjoying peaceful, drama-free lakefront mornings. If seeing Karen and Margaret's HOA meltdown put a smile on your face, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, in this neighborhood, there's always another story coming.